Hi, I'm Celestina Brozak Wild, and this is a test run for a presentation I'm giving at a summit. I'm trying to cut this down. Last time it was twice as long as it needed to be, so we need to jump into the presentation. I already feel like I'm running out of time. Let's see here. Okay. So today what I want to talk about is kind of how humans are in default fear brain mode. Like that's our kind of out of the box setting, and what we can do to move ourselves into something I call resource brain, which is a place where we can essentially just do life a lot better. Let's see, a little bit about myself. I am an integrative change worker. I'm a life coach. I'm an astrologer. I'm studying to be a hypnotist. But basically, I help people get unstuck. I help people make the changes they want to make. I help people fall in love with their lives. I help people stabilize if they're feeling really unsafe or unstable. I help people build self-trust. So let's get into it. We're going to start right off the bat with an exercise. So hopefully you guys have something to write with, a piece of paper, a notebook, your phone. I want you to take a moment to think of something that feels kind of like a big problem that hasn't been solved for you yet. And then just make a list of about 4 to 5 ways to address that. If you're feeling ambitious, you can make a list of 4 to 5 ways to solve it. If you're feeling less ambitious, you can make a list of 4 to 5 ways to begin to solve it. I'm not going to give you too much time because we don't have a lot of time. When you're done, the last part of this exercise is to remove that list from where you can see it. So if you're on your phone, scroll down or open a new note. If you're in a notebook, flip the page, flip the paper over, and then we'll get back to this at a later point in time. I wonder where this is going to go. The last thing I'll say is this: for this exercise, it's not enough for you to just think it. You actually have to write it down. So please write it. Don't just think it. Okay. So why are we in fear brain? What the heck even is fear brain? For better or worse, fear is kind of one of the primary ways that we survive. So my mentor, Karen Hawkwood, said it this way: fear has been our most evolutionarily adaptive quality. And the brain kind of knows that, and the brain really capitalizes on that. So in order to survive, one way that we survive, I should say, is our brain has something called negativity bias, which means that it's a lot better at focusing on what's negative. It's a lot better at dwelling on what's negative. It's a lot better at like feeling what's negative. And the reason for this is because if something is positive and yummy and good, chances are we're not in danger. If something feels really scary and bad, chances are we are in danger. So one of the things that happens is we tend to focus on what's bad. We tend to kind of, think catastrophically. We tend to kind of jump to the worst case scenario. Our brain doesn't just offer us the best case scenario. It always offers us the worst case scenario. However, there's another part of how our brain works that tends to create a cycle out of that, because kind of the mood that we're in emotionally, right? Like negativity bias kind of puts us in a mood of being fearful and anxious, because we're always like kind of just hyper aware of like what could go wrong, or like focusing on what is going wrong. But doesn't make us feel very great. But when we don't feel very great, our brain, trying to be helpful, does this thing where it begins to sort everything, our memories, our thoughts, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're feeling, by other stuff that doesn't feel good. So it sorts based on our mood. It sorts based on our emotional affect. Okay, so you can see how this kind of creates a cycle. You're like, I'm feeling shitty. And the brain's like, well, here's other shitty stuff. And you're like, well, now there's a lot more shitty stuff. I'm feeling even more shitty. And you can see how this can kind of turn into a pattern that we're just living in and with for like a really long time. The other piece of this is not just what our brain is doing when it's got this negativity bias online. It's just nervous system arousal, right? Like something will happen in real time that will make us feel scared, that will make us feel angry. You know, we'll hear a loud noise. We'll have someone overstep our boundary. When our nervous system gets activated, right? When we jump into like fight or flight, freeze and fawn, whatever. Again, our brain trying to be helpful, trying to help keep us alive, does a few things. One of the things that it does is called perceptual occlusion, which the brain on purpose really heavily begins to filter external input. And the reason for that is because when your life is in danger, you don't want to be stuck in indecision. You know, like you don't want to be like, well, I have 10 options. Let me weigh them all. So the brain is like, I'm just going to shut out everything that's not important. And, you know, you have 2 options, sometimes 1 option. I'm just going to really like clear the field for you. So it's really easy for you to take action to save your life. But that's actually, that removes a lot of information from ever even getting to our brain. The last thing that happens is when our nervous system is aroused, when we have like a heightened emotion, the natural physiological life of any emotion is like 30 to 90 seconds. And then life goes on, except for life does not go on. When someone makes us mad or when we get anxious, it usually doesn't just last 30 seconds and then we're back to being happy, right? Why not? Well, a lot of times the reason is because we begin to recycle that emotion by like remembering the thing that made us anxious, or like revisiting the event that made us mad and just being like, yeah, like that guy was a real asshole. Like we don't let it go, right? We keep thinking about it. And when we keep thinking about it, we keep generating that emotion. And the more we think about it and the more we generate that emotion, the more our brain is like, sounds like you want to make a habituated pattern out of this. I think I need to automate it. So you can see how there's just a lot about who we are as an evolutionary species, as a biological species, that is kind of centered on fear. Is kind of centered on like these heightened arousal states that are not necessarily positive. The last thing I'll say, as if this weren't enough, there's a way in which past experiences that frightened us, or past experiences that had a very strong negative emotional tone, affect the way we see reality. A mentor of mine, Jules Taylor Shore, or Shore Taylor, I can never remember how it goes, talks about it as our brain is wearing history colored glasses. And she actually means that really literally. And let me tell you a little bit more about that. So this is a little bit about how the brain works and how memory works in the brain. A lot of times memory gets moved from short-term into long-term because of the emotional track associated with it. If something doesn't have a strong emotional track, we likely forget about it. But if something felt really good or really scary, that increases the chances of that moving into long-term memory by a lot. Once we have some explicit memories of like actual events or things that happen to us in long-term memory, the brain is going to sort those. It's going to kind of try to find patterns between them. And if it finds a pattern, it is going to generalize that pattern into something called implicit memory. So for example, I'll use myself, I'll throw myself under the bus. I'm dating now. I'm getting ghosted a lot. I say a lot. You see here, it's already happening. I've actually only been ghosted 4 times, which is like 4 data points. There's a ton in my dating history. I can think immediately of a lot of other times where I didn't get ghosted or I was the one that did the ghosting. But my brain really wants to make a pattern, a generalization. It really wants me to think, oh, like ghosting is something that's probably going to happen, or I always get ghosted, or like ghosting is a part of dating. You just have to expect it. So that's my brain turning these explicit instances of me getting ghosted a few times into a generalization, an implicit memory. Now, when our brain is processing raw data from reality, right? When it's processing what is actually happening in the here and now, what we are hearing, seeing, feeling, before it shares that with us, it mixes implicit memory in. The prefrontal cortex has this structure where it's millions of columns of neurons. There's 6 neurons to a column. The top 2 neurons in those columns are just processing the raw reality data. The bottom 2 neurons in that column are pulling implicit memory in that relates to the whatever the top 2 neurons have. And then the middle 2 neurons are mixing. They're mixing the raw data with our implicit memory, and then that